Upon further inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast goes beyond the data and dives into the people, challenges, and stories behind reliability and inspection. Whether you're in the field or in the office, this podcast is for you because mechanical integrity isn't about assets, it's about the people who keep them running. Greg and I are excited to welcome Lynne Kaley to the podcast. If you don't know her, Lynne has more than 30 years of experience in the industry and has been involved with API 580 and 581 committees since the very beginning. So, Lynne, I appreciate you joining us today. And you mentioned earlier that you were with DNV back in the early 90s. How did you end up? Was that where you first started, or how did you end up? Was there a story before DNV?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting how I landed in the industry in the area I did. I got my undergraduate degree from Penn State in microbiology.
Okay.
And I graduated in 1980 and grew up in Pittsburgh. So coming out of college, looking for a job in 1980, Google that, 1980 in Pittsburgh, when all of the steel industry was shutting down and unemployment was like just skyrocketed. So there were no jobs. And my parents had moved to Chicago. So I went out to Chicago and ended up getting a job as a lab technician at Amaco Oil down in Naperville, Illinois. And so I started there as a lab technician in the corrosion lab, part of the corrosion and materials group, and I worked there for about 4 or 5 years. But while I was there, I decided to get my master's degree in metallurgical engineering, and specialize in corrosion and materials. So I got that degree while I was working there as a technician. So I was going to school full time and working full time. I got my degree, I can't even remember when, I guess it was 85. I got my master's degree, and then they transferred me down to Texas City. And that's where I started my engineering career with Amaco Oil down in Texas City Refinery, which is now the Galveston Bay Refinery with Marathon. And worked there for about 5 years and during that time, we were using DNV for doing some engineering consulting. And I think we were doing furnace tube life studies and some other things like that. And ended up deciding to make the jump to DNV to do consulting.
Did you end up at Amaco just because you had, with the microbiology, right, you would have had plenty of lab experience going through college? Is that how you ended up in that lab?
Yeah, Amaco Oil, there was a lot of Amaco stuff going on there. There was chemicals, oil, all kinds of stuff going on at the research center in Naperville. And they traditionally there were so many degreed science students that couldn't get jobs. They ended up hiring a lot of them, because they had a lot of science background and lab experience. So
Okay.
I hired a lot of undergraduate science degrees. So 2 of my cousins were working there too, who also
Okay.
had science degrees. So yeah, it was kind of the thing they did back then. If you can get somebody with a good education and some lab experience, even though they're not working in their field, they still do a pretty good job on the lab side.
Right. I mean, there's a skill to being able to do
Yeah.
the analytical side in the labs. Did they push you then to go get the master's, or was that something that you felt you wanted to go do to get to
It
that next
was
level?
it was kind of a combined thing. I think they thought I had an aptitude for it, and I was not interested in being a lab technician for the rest of my life. I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting and challenging. And I was really fortunate because one of the engineers in the metallurgy department had been a professor downtown at Illinois Institute of Technology and was very good friends with the dean of the college. And so he got me connected with the dean, and they had me take a few undergraduate engineering courses at the local community college, and then accepted me into the master's program. So I kind of slipped in, easily slipped in.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, it was a really fortunate opportunity. It was a really good opportunity. I feel like that's happened a lot in my career, that I've had a really good opportunity thrown at my feet, and felt like all I needed to do was be smart enough to bend over and pick it up.
I mean, that's half the story, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's the skill, is to be able to recognize when to take it.
yeah. I think so. When it's a really good opportunity, when you don't want to just step over it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it was a tough 4 or 5 years working full time and then driving downtown and going to school at night. And after 5 years of kind of living and breathing corrosion and materials, because I worked in a corrosion materials lab and then studied it all the time. It was a pretty grueling 4 or 5 years, but then I got out of the cold, cold north and they sent me down to Texas City, never to return.
How did you feel, Lynn, that working in the field or working in the plant, how did that impact your experience? And were you happy with that in your career path?
I think it's a necessary step. I think that in order to be really good at what we do, I think it's important that you see a lot out in the field. You see the magnitude of things. That's a really big refinery. I mean, I had never seen pumps that size and flanges that size, and to get that kind of experience. But I climbed through hundreds of vessels, looked over the shoulders of inspectors. I always said I can read ultrasonic scopes. I can't calibrate one or operate one, but I can read them because I spend so many hours looking over the shoulder of inspectors and them explaining to me what everything was. We went out and did everything together. The inspectors would go out and inspect things as they found it. They'd call us and we'd go out with them and crawl through the equipment and look at things, and with wet mag or with ultrasonics or dye penetrant, everything. We did everything and participated in everything. And I don't think you need 30 years of that. After about 5 years of it, I felt like I had kind of learned what I needed to learn. I wasn't really anxious to climb around in equipment and wear coveralls for the rest of my career. So taking that and applying it at other sites and other refineries, I felt like at the time that Amaco refinery was the flagship for Amaco. It was one of the best and biggest, it was second largest refinery in the US at the time. So it was a really great experience that I could translate to smaller plants with other companies. So I felt like that was a good opportunity to go into consulting and kind of carry that message into other plants and other companies.
And so that's how you ended up making the transition then over to DNV.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I was working with them as consultants and I really got along with them. I just thought they were fun. And they called me out allegedly to look at some of the test results for some work they were doing for us. And we never even looked at the stuff. They sent me around to about 5 or 6 different people and had conversations with them and then offered me a job at the end of the day.
Sneaky.
That was sneaky.
Greg,
But they were great.
Were you part of that?
He
Were you part of
was.
that?
He was one of the people I talked to.
Okay. So Greg, you guys have known each other then for a long time.
Yes, sir. A long time.
Long time.
Did you guys cross paths down at Texas City, or was it just at that once she made the transition?
I think it was once she made the transition. I may have
Yeah.
seen her in the office once or twice talking to Tim Munsterman or somebody like that.
Or Bobby.
Or Bobby.
Tim, and
Yeah.
Ray were the ones that I worked with the most.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg and I have a kind of a common history. My family is all from St. Louis, and Greg's from that area too. So we knew some of the same people, and he knew a couple things about. My uncle was a federal judge. He knew a little bit about my uncle, so we kind of hit it off right away.
It's amazing how small the world is, and then when you get into, you talk and you're like, oh, oil and gas and petrochemical and all this, it's so big, or worldwide companies, and then you're like, it's really a small, within our
really
space, it's a
is.
really small.
And sometimes you think it's big internationally, and it's really very small internationally too. I mean, it's amazing to me when I go different places how many people know who I am, who I have never met, and they're from all over the world just because of my association with 581. And you realize how small a world it is, or how many talks and all of the API talks and meetings. There used to be a lot more conferences that we'd go to and presentations, and people all meet and say, "Oh yeah, I saw you when you gave a presentation, 25 years ago or something." Makes you feel old, but it is really it is a very small population, a very small niche inside of a really large industry.
Yeah. You know what, the one that I feel the worst about is when somebody comes up and goes, "I took 581 training from you." And you're like, "Yeah, you did." And you're trying to place you're
Exactly.
trying to place it because you've done so many of them.
Exactly.
The public courses, you get people from everywhere, and
Yeah.
Yeah, and with me, I'm one of the few females that has been in the industry for this period of time too. So I I'm probably a little bit more memorable because there's not that many more people. So everybody feels like they know me,
Mhm.
and they walk up and, "Oh yeah, I remember you gave me a training course. What's your," "Yeah, yeah, I remember."
I have a friend who's a teacher, been a teacher for a really long time. And so whenever we go out and somebody comes up to them and they're like, "Oh, hey, Mr. So and so." And I know already that like my job is to step in and introduce myself
Yeah,
so that they can say their name and they can then try to
exactly.
play. Yeah, because right, it's a one-way connection. Like it's a two-way connection, but there's only one person versus, thousands of
Exactly.
people.
Thousands, hundreds
Yeah.
and thousands. And yeah, yeah, that's a trick I use all the time too.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to. You
Yeah.
have to.
You go
So,
if somebody doesn't introduce me to somebody right away, I actually do that even on a personal level.
yeah.
It gets them
Yeah.
off the hook.
So at DNV, what type of jobs, what type of work were you getting into? Because this would have then been early 90s,
Would have been,
late
yeah, I
80s.
want to say it was the fall of 1990.
Okay.
It was November of 19
That sounds about right.
November of 1990, I think, when I left Amaco. And I started, it was Tim Munsterman that was running I guess it was the materials group.
Yeah. Failure analysis lab, materials group.
Yeah, it was kind of everything. It was materials and corrosion and failure analysis and all of that. And so Tim and I were kind of the two metallurgists, and we did everything. We did all of the failure analysis work, went out and visited customers and tried to get work. We did training courses. Greg and Bobby would generally go out and promote training courses or tutorials, and we'd go out with them and do that. We did a lot of plant inspection, a lot of furnace tube inspections. For a while, we did field metallography, did all kinds of stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how many of my weekend plans got ruined by a late Friday afternoon phone call. We used to dread it when the phone rang at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. It was like, okay, who's gonna who's gonna lose their weekend? Just did that. I would say for maybe I was gonna say 5 years. So it was probably only 2 or 3 years
Okay.
that we ran around doing that. Then we were hiring more people, getting more business and hiring more people, and we had younger people that could go out and do it and get that started, get some of the field stuff done.
So you've actually been through the process of building a few different companies up then,
Oh yeah, yeah. That's kind of all I seem to have done.
as I think through all the different places that I know you from.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of been a shtick for you on the side.
Yeah, that would be the thing. The common theme in my career has probably been startups and new development, new
Hmm.
product development. And I, people will call it research, they would call it all kinds of things. We never really invented anything. We would just take technologies that were available and pull them together in a problem-solving way, a way to solve a specific problem. And that's really so at DNV, I started as a metallurgist, but then I moved pretty quickly into project management. We called it multidiscipline project management. And that would be when we take the materials and the inspection and failure analysis and all of that and pull it together into one big project. And I was overseeing those multidiscipline projects, but they were all around answering a question, solving an industry problem, something like that. Like, well, we started a program on wet H2S damage
Hmm.
and how much damage a vessel can physically take before it actually loses its integrity. And we did some big drums where we hydro tested. Remember that hydro test we did right
Oh yeah.
at I forget which
It
refinery.
was core. Well, there was one that was done up at, well, I probably don't know if I need to mention company name,
Right.
but it was at a refinery up north.
Right.
And it was a vessel
We
that was riddled.
pressurized it.
Yeah, it
Remember
was
we had
riddled with H2S damage.
Yep.
And we did AUT on 100% of it, shear wave and straight beam.
Yep.
And then we monitored with strain gauges and acoustic emission testing.
As we pressured it up to
Yep.
design pressure.
Yep, and beyond.
Yep.
And then it winds up failing at like 4 to 5 times design.
It was over that, but it was at a flange weld.
Yes, it was at a defect. It wasn't even where the Hixonic
It
damage
wasn't even
was.
where the damage was.
Yeah.
Yep. And then
That
we
was cool.
depressured it, and then we re-inspected everything, and concluded that while wet H2S damage is ugly, it's really not. It has to be really, really advanced in order for it to affect the mechanical integrity. And at the end of it all, it's probably not even going to fail in that area. It's going to fail at some other weak point like a flange.
Right.
We did a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
And it was all new. We
Isn't it-
never did anything twice, it seemed like.
Isn't it amazing how long, though, these JIPs go on?
Yeah.
When we were there, there
Yeah.
was all the HTHA's been going on forever.
Yeah.
Poop drums has been going on forever.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just like, but that was a fun project. The Hicks, I remember that.
Yeah. That was a big project. That was our first biggest multidiscipline project, but we had never done it before, Brandon. It was really kind of fun. I mean, there were about 10 of us out there, and none of us really knew what to expect. And it was a little scary. See, there was a lot of cowboy engineering going on back in the 1990s and early 2000s. We could do stuff you couldn't even get close to doing now, like putting a drum, an old retired drum out in the middle of a plant, plant parking lot, and put a trailer. We hauled a trailer over there and hooked it up and pressured it up. We didn't know what we were doing.
So I'm glad you
We could have
specified
blown that whole thing up.
But it was hydro tested, not pneumatic.
Right, it was
Right.
hydro. We were probably not far enough away, according to today's standards.
So as you're explaining that in my head, I was actually thinking that some company allowed you to do that hydro test while it was sitting in place.
Oh, no.
Not removed out. So I'm glad you.
No, we hauled it out. It was in a parking lot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because initially I was like, okay, I'm glad we definitely didn't say who that was.
Right. We were, and it was this was kind of groundbreaking stuff. We were trying to figure out, all the stuff that was going on. It was really fun. It was very creative, really fun. It wasn't really unsafe. Today, compared to today, they wouldn't let you do it, but we never really were at risk. It was pretty safe.
There were actually 2 other tests around that time too that were exactly the same way, wound up the same way.
Yeah.
So that was good. And remember,
Other, not us, other people.
Right. Right. And
Other
remember,
people that perform similar destructive tests. Yeah.
And Lynn's talking about Hixohit too. She's not talking about sulfide stress cracking. So
Right.
for the
Right. We're
listeners.
talking about blistering. mostly.
Right.
Yeah.
Was failure testing a big thing at that time to try to empirically figure out answers? Or was this kind of the new, or had it been around?
I wouldn't say it was a big thing. It was something that everybody kind of wanted to know the answer to, but nobody had ever really done it. And it just so happened like the 2 or 3 different tests that were done, ours and a couple other people were done at the same time or around the same time. It wasn't coordinated. It was just like a kind of a question everybody had in the industry is, if you have this damage, how much does it affect the mechanical integrity of the vessel? Because it's blisters are like, it's like a layered vessel. It's not, you haven't lost half the wall. You've just split the wall in half. So you have 2 sheets instead of 1 big sheet. And how much does that really affect the integrity? And our belief was that it didn't really affect it, but we had no idea how little it affected it. We had no thoughts that it would actually make design pressure or go above. I mean, we got to design pressure. We were a little bit disappointed. We're like, oh, well, shoot, that was sort of a non-event.
Mhm.
And then we just kept inching it up a little afterwards until we said, okay, we're done. We don't feel like we can do it anymore. And then somebody said, there's something going on. There was a little AE signal, and it turned out it was just a little pinhole leak.
Okay. Got it.
So so it kind of answered the question. It's really challenging to find the equipment. The setup is expensive, and there are some safety concerns. So it wasn't like you're going to do 100 of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But between us and a couple other companies doing it, we kind of answered that question. We satisfied ourselves that we could go a lot further than we were willing to go. That was probably the main lesson.
These JIPs usually end up, especially damage mechanism related, end up forming because unfortunately something happens.
Yeah.
Blisters, like, okay, Greg mentioned HTHA. You don't really see HTHA with the naked eye. Blisters you see very clearly. Had we been dealing with and just ignoring for decades that blisters were there? Or was there a change in process that created that new damage mechanism?
Greg, check me if you remember this the same way too. We had known they were there for years and we're monitoring them. And even in our plant in Texas City, we had vessels that had very large blisters. And,
Mm-hmm.
you just drill a hole in them and vent them.
Yep.
And didn't really worry about them. But what changed it was the Union Oil failure
Mm-hmm.
up in Lamont. And that's what drew the attention to it again. Like, we hadn't really worried. We knew they were there. We hadn't really worried about it too much. But then that failure occurred and it was hydrogen related. And then everybody got nervous and said, okay, how bad does it have to be? And should we be more worried about it than we have been? And that was back in that time. I don't think we had anything called SOHIC. I think that wasn't that the beginning of SOHIC, Greg?
I'm not sure, Lynn,
That's
honestly.
kind
I
of my
mean,
recollection is
I
that
re-
we knew about sulfide stress cracking, we knew about blistering, but we really didn't have that much knowledge about the fact that you could have a really bad blister that would go adjacent to a weld and you'd get,
Right.
you'd get a circumferential split as a result of that.
Right. I'm trying to remember. There was a metallurgist at Exxon. Was his name Bob Merrick or Merritt?
Yeah,
or
Bob Merrick.
something?
Yeah.
And he had written some stuff early on, I think after Lamont, about wet H2S cracking that a lot of people referenced. And I've always wondered, Lynn, and maybe you can answer this question. In 581, in the cracking severity table, when you look at the relative severity of mechanisms, things like HIC are not as high as things
Right.
like chloride stress cracking, right, and certain other mechanisms. And I got to think that experience probably influenced.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
definitely. Yeah, those cracking susceptibilities were developed by a group of metallurgists that was part of the 581, or it was actually not 581 at the time. It was the Joint Industry Project. We had a group of people to develop that table. And the idea of the table was we didn't have crack initiation rates and we didn't have crack growth rates for every cracking mechanism, but we had a lot of experience. I mean, we had decades of experience of people in the room, people with 30, 40, 50 years experience, and there were like 8 of us. And the question was, how likely are you, if you have the conditions, the material and the environmental conditions that exist, how likely are you to get a crack initiated? And then if you have a crack initiated, how likely is it to propagate through a wall quickly, and how quickly? So it's a more of a relative crack growth rate. So in the case of caustic, if once you have the conditions and a crack is initiated, it actually will result in a leak fairly quickly, as will chloride cracking if you've got the conditions. But with blistering, it doesn't. You'll notice with sulfide stress cracking, it's the same as blistering. That's kind of a little anomaly because that happens so fast that
Yep.
you actually can't even inspect for it. So that would be normally would be a really high number. So the blistering is low because it just doesn't propagate quickly. You may have a lot of damage, but it doesn't go through wall. Whereas some of the other mechanisms with the 1,000 or 5,000 are ones that, with experience, we know once it starts propagating, it goes pretty quickly.
Yeah, so the HIC is at 10, right? The HIC number is a
Yeah,
10 base,
yeah,
just for relative comparison.
Yeah.
10 versus 1,000 or the 5,000.
Or
that you mentioned.
5,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it PTA? Polythionic is like 5,000.
Yes.
Right.
PTA is 5,000. Caustic's 5,000. If you don't know what it is, you normally will assign 5,000.
Yeah.
And then amine, I think, is kind of in the middle.
Mhm.
100 or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay. All right. So you did failure analysis work with DNV. You learned a lot from that. Then then where did we go after that? Or where did
Yeah,
where
then
did,
then
where
we
did we
moved
go
to the
with the?
multidisciplinary stuff.
Yep.
And then, like right around that time when we were doing multidisciplinary stuff, the RBI activity was starting to kick in. So DNV was developing the proposal. It was being reviewed by API. We were awarded it, and we actually kicked off that project in 92, I think it is, 92, I think it was 93 we kicked it off. And I was involved in the project in 93. I was not the lead of the project in 93. We had a series of 2 or 3 different project managers before I took over. And so from 93 to 95, the first draft of the base resource document was developed. And then as soon as that was pretty much complete or close to complete, we initiated a pilot study, the first pilot study. And in that first version, we actually had a qualitative, a semi-quantitative, and a quantitative RBI approach. And we tried to apply all 3 of them at a local plant for 1 unit in a local plant. And I ran that pilot project. And as we went through and reviewed the results, we just learned a lot. We learned a lot about what worked, what didn't work. We got some really crazy answers. We had to modify our models a little bit. Just standing up in front of that group, every time we'd have a meeting, we'd have a half a day where we would just discuss the results of the pilot study and then recommendations for what we needed to do to fix or correct our models, then go back and revise it and review it again the next time. So that was like, that 94, 95, and that was when the final report was released. And then in 96, that's when I took over as project manager of the RBI, the Sponsor Group project, and ran that until I left in 2000. And we went from, the base resource document to adding the damage mechanisms, adding the inspection effectiveness tables. Just as it developed, to look a lot more like what it looks like today. In the process of doing that, we decided that the qualitative was kind of a waste of time. It was so conservative that just everything was too high. We used to think that you had high-risk units and low-risk units, but in reality, you've just got high-risk equipment and low-risk units and low-risk equipment and high-risk units. So unit level qualitative didn't really add a lot. And the semi-quantitative and quantitative were fairly similar. It just had a lot more factors and details in the quantitative, which when we went through and tested it, didn't add a lot of value and took a ton of time. So we trimmed it down and ended up with just one approach, which we called quantitative. We've since changed the terminology to semi-quantitative, but at the time we called it quantitative. And that was what got really rolled out to the industry in 96, 97, 98, was that one quantitative approach. That's very similar to what we do today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's interesting, Brandon, is that at this time, and Lynn will probably get to this, it was all owner-operators. It was a closed joint industry project at this time. Only later would 581 be created. But at this time, DNV was the only non-owner operator in the room.
Right.
Right, because you guys, DNV won the bid to be able to lead the JIP, right?
Right.
Okay.
But it was an industry-sponsored JIP. That was the way we ran things then. It was just companies would sponsor it. They'd all throw money in one pot, and then somebody would take that money, and they would run that project and develop it. So
It sounds like a
that
really
was fairly
cool time.
common. It probably a little bit weird to people today, but that was fairly common back then. That's the way all JIPs ran.
Mhm.
So we had, and the other interesting thing is we had not envisioned software in the beginning. And by the time we got to the pilot study, there was just no way you could put 1,000 pieces of equipment and run it through that analysis without software. So we had to, in parallel, develop software, which has never been, I've done it for years and never been a favorite part of my job. It's kind of a necessary evil, but I've always kind of hated it. And I love-hate relationship with it. So we developed the software, and before we did that, it was kind of funny. The sponsor group knew what we were doing. We had, days and days of discussions and technical review, but they had no concept of what it would take on a practical level. So we were trying to, we developed a software for us to use, but they had no concept that they really needed software. So they thought they could do it with a spreadsheet. So they asked us to do a tutorial. So we did a 1.5-day tutorial for all the members. And they came in with their computers and we gave them some worksheets. And they did a calculation for one component in the worksheets we gave them. It took them 1.5 days. Nobody ever got anything right. And at the end of it, we said, okay, so how do you guys feel? How was the training? Was it valuable? They all said, yeah, it was valuable. It was painful. And John Reynolds looked at us and said, it was a really good training. Don't ever make me do that again. And so we developed software. Then they were convinced after that we had to develop software. So that started the software development side that was married with the technology in that project that we, in 2008, when that got split apart, we split the software from the technology, but that's how the software got to be part of it.
Man, yeah. So let me ask you this. Was that a fun time for you?
Oh,
Because
God.
there's a lot of lack
Oh,
of
yeah.
structure. There's a lot of just kind of, as you call it, cowboy. There's a
Yeah.
lot of cowboying happening there. Do you thrive in that type of a space?
Oh my
or-
gosh, it was a blast.
Yeah.
We had so much fun. I don't even want to tell you how many divorces there were in that group of people. We spent a lot of time working and we really enjoyed each other, didn't we, Greg?
Yeah, we did.
We liked traveling together. We liked working together. We laughed all the time. We had a great time. It was the golden years at DNV then, that 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
We just loved what we did. It was so challenging. It was so creative. It was so rewarding. We were really doing something of value. We were building a business at the same time.
It was a great time.
Solving problems in the industry, working. We had, career-long friendships with people like Mark Eisenhoff and, some of the early adopters of 581 who we've just been friends with and coworkers with for 40 years. It was just a blast. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Nice. Yeah. When you enjoy going to work and you enjoy what you're doing, it makes it a lot better, a lot
Yeah.
less like
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I think
I
we
don't-
maybe enjoyed it a little too much.
I don't know about you, Lynn, but I know for me, I felt like we were making a difference. I
Yes.
felt like
It was
we
really
were
rewarding.
pioneers, that
Yep.
we were in a unique space.
And everything we did, it wasn't just the RBI stuff. It was
Yep.
fitness for service was really new back then.
Statistical
These
sampling, all
destructive
kinds.
tests things were really new. AE was still something that people thought was witchcraft. And, everything we were doing was new and innovative. And it was all with a focus on solving a customer problem. And then we'd solve it or give them the answer they needed to take the right steps. It was immediately rewarding. Every day was rewarding. It was amazing.
You mentioned AE there, acoustic emission testing, and that back then people thought that it was witchcraft. I still hear people talk about it that way. What's your take on acoustic emissions?
Yeah, well, back then there was a lot of people that talked about it. I don't know. I never was convinced. I think there's people that know how to make it work,
Mm-hmm.
but that was never a big focus of mine.
Okay. So like most other ND methods,
Yeah.
it's if the person who's doing it knows what they're doing, there's probably some
Right.
value. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Just curious. You said back then, and
Right.
it's
Well,
like-
I was thinking Greg was going to laugh at me when I said that too, because
No.
I think he got a lot of comments back then from people.
Oh yeah. I saw a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think Greg was purposely ignoring that, hoping we'd just.
I was. No, we're interviewing Lynn, not me. Remember.
People openly called it witchcraft back then.
Having come from Monsanto, I have to be
Voodoo.
careful,
Voodoo inspection.
but because we did a lot of R&D at Monsanto. But I agree with Lynn. I mean, to me, the issue with AE is being able to tie it in any way, shape, or form to fracture mechanics. I don't know if you can, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of other value that comes from it, but potential, but
Yeah.
just don't abuse it.
Right.
Okay. Just curious.
In combination with everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we make it through, and then what comes after? We get into the mid 2000s then.
So yeah, in 2000, that's when we started equity in 2001. So I left DNV in 2000. Greg left me, and then I left. If you'll notice, Greg and I kind of follow each other back and forth. So he left, went to M&M Engineering, and then I left and went to M&M Engineering, and then we started with a group of other people started Equity Engineering. Right about that time, at that point, it was no longer a sponsor group, it was a user group, which included non-owner users. So there were contractors in there at the time, but they were interested in, I think they kind of felt like with DNV, we'd gone as far as maybe the DNV energy was going to take them. And they were interested in looking around for to see if maybe there was another contractor that might breathe new life into the project. And, I had a really good relationship with the group. I think when I left DNV, it made it pretty easy for them to then decide to go out and contract that out to someone else. So they went out for bid, and we were just starting equity engineering. So we bid on it and got the project. So I moved over to equity engineering, and then the project moved over to equity engineering. And so we took over the software and the development project and managed it there until 2008, when API decided they no longer wanted to have an association with the software. They had never done it for any other project. They didn't quite know how they got into it, and they just wanted to get out of it. So we split the software from the technology. The document, the second edition, I think second edition, BRD went to API, and that's what they used to start the 581 committee. And then Equity kept the software and still manages the software today.
Were you still leading or participating then in the JIP and the committee work at that point?
Well, yeah, we were still running. Yeah.
No,
I didn't leave Equity until 2009. So yeah, I was still there at that time.
Okay.
So you were split.
Yeah, you were part of that. Okay.
Yeah. Actually helped negotiate the split.
Okay.
So we divided that up, started 581. 581 committee took a few years before it got traction, as I suspected it would.
Why?
Just starting from scratch. Well, we had everybody that had been involved prior to that was attending these meetings, these biannual meetings at a different time of year in a different location. And generally or often were different people than went to API meetings. So now we moved this document to the API meetings, and you've got to create a committee of people who know enough about the technology to actually drive it forward. And a lot of the people either didn't attend API and didn't plan to, or, they just didn't have much, they couldn't continue or whatever. So it took really 3 to 5 years before we got the right leadership for the committee, and we had enough bodies in the room that knew enough about the technology to actually start working on the document again.
So what year did that end up happening then?
Well, I'd have to go backtrack from the second edition to the third edition release. I don't remember when those were. Third edition was 3 releases ago. It would have been, if we started in 2008, it was probably 12, 13, somewhere in there. It was actually when Brent Ray took over as chair.
So third edition, I think, was 16. Does that sound right?
That was
April 2016.
Okay.
Easton 16.
Okay. Third edition
so
was
it was probably
2019.
And it took us a couple years before that, 2 or 3 years before that, to really make the changes we needed for that third edition release. So it was probably about 2012, 2013 that we really started getting enough. We had critical mass in the committee to actually start working on the document, on the third edition document. And that's when I took the role of master editor, was in the beginning there. So I rolled out of Equity as the project manager, but then I rolled into 581 as the master editor.
Okay.
So I stayed involved there.
Do you think we finally got enough people participating with enough knowledge, because we had to let people go try to do some implementations first and experience it?
You mean that to make that transition?
Yeah.
Well, the original group, the sponsor group, were a lot of R&D back when all these companies had R&D. So they were not real field hand type people. They were real research and development type people. And then when we moved to the user group, those people kind of disappeared. And then you started having some of the plant related people, the mechanical integrity leads and inspectors and things, join that group. And so you didn't see a lot of technology improvements, but you saw a lot of practical implementation issues, like wet H2S or external corrosion was too high, and we'd modify some things, trying to make them a little more practical and get realistic results. And when we moved it to the 581 committee, that's kind of a whole different thing. It requires a little bit of practical, but it requires also some technology. So I think mostly the reason why it took time is just because you had to transition from a group that was functioning, a different group of people that was functioning outside of the API to a group of people that were now going to function as a part of API. And they have to attend API, and not all companies, not everybody can go to API, at other companies. You've got to get approval, and you've got to, you got to be the right person in the right place. So there were just some people that attended our sponsor group meetings that just weren't allowed to go to API and attend the meeting. So there was just no way they were going to be approved to do that. So we lost a lot of people just because of that. And then we had to kind of bring new people in.
If we could have kept it as maybe not a private, well, maybe a private JIP, do you think we would be further along in the technology development now?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do
Okay.
because everything at API takes longer. You got to go through the consensus process, and it just takes longer. But we lost a lot. We lost a lot of time.
That momentum stalled. And
yes.
yeah.
And I actually argued for us to split. If you want to split them, that's fine. But let's continue the meetings outside, at least for a while, outside of the API conferences, so that we can keep the continuity. But they wanted to make a hard break and just make a jump. So they were prepared. I think they knew it was going to take some time and some transition time. I don't think they were too worried about it. So yeah, I think we would have moved ahead a little further.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also maybe lost a little bit of steam on the technology side too. I don't know that we've ever regained that.
What do you mean there?
We're working on looking at technologies within 581 and trying to tweak it and improve it, when those tweaks and improvements aren't necessarily going to solve any problems. It's just going to change our answer a little bit, but it's not going to solve our problems. I think the group maybe has lost a little bit of the problem-solving technology focus. You know what I mean? That the purpose of 581 is to find things before it finds us.
Mm-hmm.
And doing little tweaks is probably not going to make big advances in doing that. Once you've implemented 581, for 5 to 10 years, you've pretty much gotten the majority of the value out of it. You can't stop doing it because that's an ongoing project. That's an ongoing thing. But you gain that. Like, for example, if you're inspecting every turnaround and RBI allows you to extend your inspections from 4 years or 5 years to 10 years, you get that big benefit the first cycle. But then that's it, right? Then that's your 10-year cycle. You don't get that a second time. You don't get to keep taking credit for a 4 to 6 year extension, right?
Your planners are already expecting to have
Right.
right? Yeah.
You get that benefit once. And so once you've done this for about 5 or 10 years, you've pretty much optimized your intervals based on the technology you've got. So tweaking things around the edges isn't going to dramatically change the cost benefit story. So I think we've lost a little bit of that. And I think we've lost it in the industry. It's, you heard me say in the beginning that we started this project with all of these R&D people with decades and decades of experience. Those organizations, they don't exist anymore. We don't have the John Reynoldses and the Dick Horvaths and name some other ones, Jay Campbell, some of these people that they were around. They found, diagnosed, and named these damage mechanisms. High temperature hydrogen attack was found by these people, and they developed the curves.
Yep. G.A. Nelson at Shell.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have that in the industry anymore. And so I think the companies in general have lost that technology brain.
Got it. So the people with the experience and the application knowledge, plus then also the willingness and ability to create also the technical side, and develop and build out, and the willingness to take
think
that
outside
chance.
the box. Think new.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just try to incrementally improve what we're already doing.
Right.
Go look for a problem that we haven't solved yet and go try to find a novel and new way to solve it. And hopefully that fits in, it's an add-on, or it can be integrated, or we can swap out. We can take an older technology module and replace it with a newer technology module that gives you more answers. It doesn't just give you a different number. It gives you additional information that you can use. For example, right now we get an inspection recommendation, do an A, B, or C inspection, and then you go look at a table, it's something generic, and you've got to go figure out how you're going to actually apply that to your component. Would it be great if what came out was go inspect this in this area and these CMLs with this method and this much coverage, have it spit out that specific inspection plan, fill those gaps. So identify the gaps and fill them, or identify the problems we're not solving and try to come up with a novel and new way to, and again, we don't have to invent something that doesn't exist. We just have to go out and find the technologies that exist and then apply them in a practical way to solve our problems.
This sounds like you're going back to your old DNV days of problems of problem and solution finding.
I can never stop that, Greg, right?
Critical thinking skills. Yeah.
That's where I always end up. We start a business and we get it rolling, and then I end up gravitating toward the new side. If you roll out a service and, in a consulting term, you're rolling out a service to make money, right? But we really, they would hate it if they heard us say this. We really didn't care about the money. We cared about solving the problems, and we knew if we solved the problems, the money would come. So we didn't worry about the money. We worried about solving problems. So you get that out like 581. And after 5 or 10 years, the customer you started with that implemented it, they pretty much got it. They can manage it themselves. They've seen the benefits. Now what do? You can go on to the next customer. That's true. Or you figure out what the next challenge is.
Yep.
And you go and solve that. So now what are they struggling with? And how can we help them make that next step? That's where I think 581 needs to go, is where can we not just tweak and keep what we've got going, but how can we take those next big steps of solving problems?
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our conversation with RBI expert Lynne Kaley. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Thank you for listening to Upon Further Inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast. This episode was co-created by Inspectioneering and Core Solutions. Our producers are Nick Schmoyer, Jocelyn Christie, and Jeremiah Wooten. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. Listeners should seek their own qualified advisors for guidance. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us next time wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.